Come on, you know this. Listen.
Geez, that would be awesome.
She cares more about money than she did about her husband.
Every bullet here will be traced back to that store.
Wait, I'm not wrong about you.
Relax.
No!
The movie kicks off with a young girl named Lydia, who one morning heads to a gun shop to buy firearms and ammunition for her boyfriend, Jonah. Jonah is part of a criminal gang led by a guy called El Padrino. After picking up the weapons, Lydia, Jonah, and two other gang members go to the house of a man they believe stole money from El Padrino. The house is occupied by a family, 3 sons, a wife, and a husband. Gunfire erupts as soon as Jonah and his crew enter the house. Lydia, standing outside, is shaken when she hears the sound of shattered glass as Jonah fires his gun. She's not used to Jonah's violent side, so it catches her off guard. Meanwhile, 3 kids who had been playing in the yard run into the house, trying to find safety. Inside, Jonah has shot the husband and is grilling the terrified wife, demanding to know where the stolen money is. She insists she knows nothing about it, while the other 2 gang members ransack the place in search of the cash. Lydia, visibly upset by the situation, pleads with Jonah to leave the woman unharmed. But Jonah, ignoring her, pushes her to prove her loyalty by making her shoot the woman. Lydia, paralyzed with fear, can't bring herself to pull the trigger. Jonah keeps pressuring her, but in her panic, she accidentally shoots Jonah in the chest instead. Horrified by what she's done, Lydia flees the scene, desperate to escape. The story then shifts to an older man, John Link, who turns out to be Lydia's father. That day, John is at a support group, sharing his experiences as a former soldier in the U.S. military. He opens up about his time in prison, 7 years, for accidentally killing someone while drunk. John is accompanied by his old army buddy Kirby, who's like family to him. We also learn that John's been divorced for a while and now lives alone in an old camper van. After leaving the military, he works as a tattoo artist and leads a pretty lonely life, rarely seeing his daughter. Out of the blue, John gets a call from Lydia. She tells him she's leaving her home and urgently needs $2,000 to start fresh and get a job. What she doesn't tell him is that she's actually running from Jonah's associates and needs the money to stay off their radar. Wanting to help his daughter, John promises to get her the cash, even though he doesn't have it. Lydia asks him to meet her at a bar in Santa Monica, California, and pick her up. Without wasting any time, John hits the road. After a long drive, he reaches the meeting spot the next day. Lydia, looking nervous and worn out, gets into his car and quickly falls asleep during the ride to his place, exhausted from dodging Jonah's gang. Once home, John carefully carries her to bed and starts cleaning up. He gets rid of all the alcohol and drugs lying around and even stashes away the gun he finds in her bag. It's clear to him that Lydia is caught up in a dangerous lifestyle and it weighs heavily on him. When Lydia wakes up, the first thing she does is ask about the money she requested. John admits he doesn't have it yet, which makes Lydia furious. Despite her anger, John suggests she stay with him until she can get on her feet. Lydia hesitates, worried she might put her father in harm's way. She reveals that her boyfriend is dead, but doesn't confess that she's the one who accidentally killed him. John, however, notices the flyers around town labeling Lydia as a wanted criminal. He convinces her to stay for at least a week while he figures out how to help her. Later, John tries to borrow money from Kirby, but his friend refuses, suspecting Lydia might use it for drugs. Instead, Kirby advises John to get professional help for Lydia, thinking she's under the influence. That evening, a group of men shows up at John's place, pretending they're there for tattoos. Recognizing them as a threat, John secures the area to protect Lydia. A confrontation breaks out, and John fights to defend himself and his daughter. The situation escalates when one of the men vandalizes John's camper van. Just as things look grim, Kirby and his friends arrive, scaring off the attackers with their numbers. Realizing Lydia isn't safe there, John decides they need to leave immediately. During their journey, Lydia finally confesses everything. She admits that she accidentally shot Jonah while trying to retrieve stolen money for El Padrino. Now, both Jonah's gang and the police are after her. Hearing this, John becomes even more determined to protect her. They eventually find refuge at a motel for the night. Unable to sleep, Lydia steps outside for some air and chats with the young guy at the reception desk. Their conversation is cut short when a news report about Lydia being wanted by the police flashes on the TV. Panicked, the motel staff calls the authorities, exposing their location. Realizing they've been found out, Lydia urges John to grab their stuff and leave. However, by the time they're ready to go, several police officers have already surrounded the motel. In a stroke of luck, the receptionist decides to help them. He leads them to a hidden spot inside the motel. From their hiding place, John watches as two officers get closer to discovering them. Suddenly, a gunshot from another direction takes down the officers, creating a distraction. Seizing the opportunity, John and Lydia make a run for it. They steal a car belonging to another guest and drive off, but a mysterious figure starts chasing them, firing shots along the way. After a tense pursuit, they manage to lose their pursuer and escape. The next day, John Link, or JN as everyone calls him, reached out to an old buddy from his time in prison, Jack, hoping for some help figuring out who was after Lydia. Jack, who used to lead a biker gang and still had a ton of shady contacts, agreed to lend a hand. Meanwhile, JN and Lydia hit the road again, hopping onto whatever transportation they could find, and eventually landed in another city. Their next stop? A bar in Montana, where John hoped to track down an old military pal named Tom Harris, who still owed him a favor, or a few. At the bar, things didn't go as planned. The bartender got the wrong idea, assuming Lydia was JN's girlfriend, and refused to spill anything about Tom's whereabouts. Frustrated, JN stepped outside to call Kirby for some advice. While he was gone, Lydia worked her magic. Flashing her charm, she sweet-talked the bartender into giving up Tom's address. With the address in hand, the duo hitched a ride with a random stranger and made their way to Tom's place. When they got there, Jen didn't waste time. He demanded the money Tom owed him and his beloved Harley, which Tom had borrowed ages ago. But Tom dropped a bombshell. The money was gone. That night, Tom invited a bunch of his biker buddies over to his house for a little gathering. Afterward, JN and Lydia decided to crash there for the night, figuring it was safer than being on the run. But the next morning, things took a nasty turn. Tom and his wife pulled guns on JN and Lydia, trapping them inside. Turns out, Tom knew they were wanted by the cops and planned to turn them in for the $30,000 reward. Betrayed and furious, Jan wasn't about to take this lying down. He managed to disarm Tom's wife and pointed the gun at Tom, demanding his bike and whatever cash was left. But even in his anger, Jan couldn't bring himself to kill Tom, choosing instead to grab his stuff and leave with Lydia. Their escape wasn't smooth, though. Tom sent his men after them, and a wild shootout broke out on the road. Jan, always resourceful, used a gun he'd snagged from Tom earlier and managed to fend off the attackers. The next day, realizing they needed to stay off the radar, Jan decided it was time for a makeover. He shaved off his beard and mustache, while Lydia switched up her hair color to throw off anyone who might recognize her. Later, Jan went to see Jack in prison to dig deeper into who was chasing Lydia. Through Jack's network, they uncovered some shocking truths. Turns out Jonah, the boyfriend Lydia thought she'd accidentally killed, wasn't just alive, but also the mastermind behind the stolen money. Jonah had framed other people to cover his tracks, and when Lydia shot him, it threw a wrench in his plans. El Padrino, the mob boss Jonah worked for, now believed Lydia was the one who stole his money, putting her directly in the crosshairs of both Jonah and the Mafia. While Jan was busy gathering intel, Lydia was laying low at a motel. Kirby called to warn her that El Padrino's men had found out where she was. Panicked, Lydia quickly left the motel and sought refuge in a nearby movie theater, thinking she'd be safe. But it was a setup. Jonah, alive and furious, had laid a trap. Before Lydia could slip away, Jonah's goons grabbed her. Meanwhile, Jan returned from his meeting with Jack and tried to reach Lydia. When she didn't answer, he got worried. Kirby filled him in on what had happened, but also revealed a devastating truth. Jonah's men had found and killed Kirby. Heartbroken and enraged, Jan vowed to save Lydia and take down Jonah once and for all. Before confronting Jonah, Jan made a pit stop at Tom's house to grab some grenades. Tom, of course, tried to stop him, but Jan wasn't messing around. In the end, he had to kill Tom to get what he needed. Armed and determined, Jan headed to the meeting spot Jonah had chosen. As he approached, Jan raised his hands, showing he was unarmed, convincing Jonah to let him see Lydia, who was tied up in Jonah's car. What Jonah didn't know was that Jan had rigged his Harley with explosives. Just as Jonah's men moved to clear the bike from their path, it detonated, causing chaos. In the confusion, Jae-in launched a full-on assault, taking on Jonah and his crew in a brutal fight. After an intense struggle, Jae-in managed to free Lydia and take down Jonah's men. Jonah, however, slipped away in the chaos. As Jae-in and Lydia made their escape in a stolen car, they came under attack again. This time, a sniper working for El Padrino managed to shoot Jae-in, leaving him gravely injured. Despite his wounds, Jae-in pushed on, determined to keep Lydia safe. Realizing he couldn't make it, Jae-in made the ultimate sacrifice, using his last moments to protect his daughter. He passed away in Lydia's arms, leaving her heartbroken but alive. Shortly after, the police arrived and arrested Jonah. The movie wraps up with a scene showing Jonah in prison, where he's confronted by Jack and his allies. It's clear Jonah is going to have a tough time behind bars. So, if there's a lesson in all this, it's probably this: don't mess with the Mafia unless you're ready to bring some serious firepower. And maybe double check your bike for any surprise explosives while you're at it.